Hello, in today's class we will be learning about the booting process. So what is actually happening behind the logo of Windows when you start on your computer? So booting is a process or a set of operations that loads and hence starts the operating system starting from the point where user switches on the power button. In this booting process, there are BIOS, OS and hardware components which are essential if any kind of error in those can lead to the failure of the booting process. Now, let's understand the booting process. The very first step, like I said, you have to switch on your computer. Switch on. So, when you switch on your computer initializes itself and a part of computer sends signal to the computer power supply to supply the computer and its components with necessary power supply, proper amount of voltage and electricity. If there is no error in this stage, it will report no error to the motherboard and CPU. Now, like I said, a part of computer checks the power supply, but the other part will look for the very first instruction to be performed in the BIOS. BIOS is basic input-output system and it has stored it itself the very first instruction of this booting process. Actually, in today's latest computers, there is UEFI that is used in place of BIOS. So we can say that this UEFI is successor of BIOS and UEFI is Unified Extensible Firmware Interface. Now, back to the BIOS. BIOS stores the very first instruction to be performed and that instruction is to perform the post sequence. The post is power on self-test. In this post, it first checks the BIOS chip and tests the CMOS RAM. If it does not detect any battery failure, it continues to initialize CPU, checking hardware drives, secondary storage devices like hardwares, floppy drives, ports, and other hardware drives like keyboard and mouse to ensure that they are functioning properly. So, now the post check is done, it will move to the CMOS. Like I said before in post that it checks the RAM CMOS. So what is this CMOS? CMOS is kind of an employee of BIOS. CMOS will do everything that BIOS will tell it to do. So the BIOS tells the CMOS chip to tell and instructs it where to find the OS. So the CMOS. CMOS is complementary metal oxide semiconductor and it is kept alive by the CMOS battery even when the computer is turned off. It contains the system time and the date and information about all the hardware installed in your computer. Traditionally, this CMOS contains the BIOS settings too. So, when this CMOS battery dies, your computer will show that CMOS failure or CMOS error messages. But in nowadays, the latest computers, this BIOS settings are stored in the non-volatile memory. So, what keeps tabs on the time? So, there is RTC, the real-time clock, which keep tabs on the time of the computer system. And this RTC is responsible for the accurate time that we see on computer whenever we switch on the computer. So RTC actually takes the power from the motherboard. You know that motherboard always comes with the battery. So why does it need the battery? Actually, that is RTC which requires the power from the motherboard's battery. And obviously motherboard provides the power. So if the motherboard's battery dies, because battery always dies with time. Okay, so if battery fails in motherboard, then the RTC will stop keeping tabs on time when the computer is switched off, but otherwise the booting process will go on as it was. So the next step is that, like I said, the BIOS will instruct the CMOS to look for the OS. It will instruct where to look for the OS. So that is OS. Now, in the most of the computer, the OS loads from the C drive on the hard drive, even though BIOS can load OS from a floppy disk, CD or a zip drive. The order of drives that the CMOS looks to in order to locate the OS is called the boot sequence. Like I said, usually OS is installed in the C drive, but CMOS actually looks to so many places to find the OS. It will look to floppy drive, it will look to the zip drive and other drives, C drive, and then it will find the OS. So the order that is predetermined, it might be default in your computer or it can be changed by the user. So that sequence is called the boot sequence. And obviously it can be changed by the user by altering the CMOS setup. Once the OS initializes, the BIOS copies its files to the memory and OS takes over the control of the boot process. So now, actually till now, it was BIOS which was controlling and it was the in charge of this booting process. But now, here there is new in charge and that is OS. So what it will do, OS, as an in charge? First of all, it will perform the another system, memory and memory availability check and loads the device drivers needed for the external devices like printer, scanner, webcam, etc. And this kind of check was performed earlier too by the BIOS, right? But the OS does it again. So this is the final stage of the booting process. Now you can see your login screen on your computer. So this is it for the booting process, booting sequence of the computer. Now let's do a very quick recap. Like, first of all, the computer switches on, it will initialize itself. A part of it will check the power and a part of it will look for the first instruction in the BIOS. The UEFI is the successor of the BIOS. The BIOS is the basic input-output system. And UEFI, that is Unified Extensible Firmware Interface. Now, BIOS will do the first post sequence. The post is power on self-test. Power on self-test. And it will check if there is any battery failure or not. It will check the BIOS chip and CMOS RAM and the other hardware devices and drives too. Now, the BIOS will instruct the CMOS to look for the OS. Actually, it gives it the proper destination where to look for the OS. Okay. So, and this CMOS is the complementary metal oxide semiconductor. So now the CMOS contains the BIOS settings, but in latest computer these are stored in the non-volatile memory. So the computer will keep on tabs with the help of RTC rather than the CMOS. Now the CMOS looks for the OS. It will do a booting sequence, a boot sequence. It will follow a boot sequence to look for the OS. In most computers, it is on C drive. Okay. Now, Since the BIOS has copied all the files, all necessary files in the memory, it will give all responsibility of booting process to the operating system, and operating system will become the in charge, and it will again do the memory check and the other drivers check on the computer, and finally you get to see the login screen on your computer, and this is what happens behind the veil of that Windows logo. Thank you.